Good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Did anybody have any drinks last night? I certainly had a few, and I'm the stand-in because someone got COVID. So I put my hand up and said I'll do this talk about 20 hours ago, and I didn't have a talk. So I put this together this morning. So apologize if it's a little ragged, if it's a little, or if it goes over time or under time. But yeah, let's talk about practical strategies for DevSecOps in large enterprises. So first, I want to talk a little bit about who we are. So Container Solutions is we're running this this event, and Container Solutions, it has a strong focus on engineering, but we're not really devs for hire or engineers for hire. We like to work with our clients to bolster their attempts to change aspects of their ways of working or business. So a large company that might want to do something like DevSecOps would come to us, and we'd provide engineers who would actually deliver on a strategy that we help them build. We see a lot of how projects have failed in the past when we work with customers, and we believe we know some of the patterns for success of projects. So a little bit about the engineering we do. The CNCF External Secrets project was initiated by us. It's a mixture of ours and GoDaddy's, got put together and turned into what is now in incubating phase, I think. Sandbox phase of CNCF acceptance. And we also built the Java Operator SDK, which has now been taken on by Red Hat because they got the money to support it. And we do a lot of stuff on strategy. Here's some of the articles I've written on strategy that's available on our website. And we do free stuff. So relevant to this, because I'll be talking about some of the patterns that are described in this book later. Pinny, Jamie, and Miell wrote this book. They work for Container Solutions. They wrote this book a few years ago, and now it's available free on the website. If you want to get the QR code there, you can download it for free. And I'll be talking about some of those patterns today, and why they're useful. So what am I saying? We've learned a lot about introducing DevSecOps to organizations, both large and small. And there is a big difference between doing it in a big organization and doing it in a small organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that from my own personal experience and my own journey as an engineer and latterly as a consultant. This is a great book I really recommend, actually. It's called How Big Things Get Done. And it's written by, I think, a professor of Bent Fluv, I don't know how to pronounce that. Fluvberg? Is anyone? I don't know if he's Finnish or what, but anyway, that guy is a professor of, basically, I don't know what this actual title is, but he's a professor of large projects. And he gets brought in by governments and big organizations who are trying to do large-scale projects. And he just talks about all the different patterns of failure in real-world projects. And I just want to bring this up as a last-minute addition. I didn't get into the... Oh, hang on. How's that? Nope. Okay, out. And there we go. This is it's a fat tail, thin tail graph. So essentially, it's telling you which projects are a nightmare and which projects are the best. Have the best success rate against their targets. You can see at the top, you've got solar projects. Large-scale solar projects work really well. Go down to wind power, thermal, road, pipeline, water, oil and gas. And all the way down here at the bottom is IT. It's among the worst, and it's only beaten by nuclear power, Olympics, and nuclear storage. So apparently nuclear storage is the absolute... Don't get involved in a nuclear storage project if you want to deliver on time. And also, don't get involved in IT projects if you want to deliver on time. But anyway, that's a sort of taster of what's in the book, and I found a lot a lot of similarities about what he's talking about in that book and what we experience day to day when we work with clients. Yeah, how big? So yeah, I recommend that book, How Big Things Get Done. But one of the key points of the book, and none of it is rocket science, it won't really surprise people, but it gives you the sort of confidence to actually feel like you know what you're doing when you know that other projects are run the right way. He emphasizes the sort of slowly but surely approach. He calls it think fast, act slow, which is, I think, a little bit hard to parse. But what he means is that you need to spend a lot of time up front figuring out how it's going to work. And I think in IT we'd call that proof of concepts, or doing little experiments. And those are patterns we use in the book, in our book, in the Cloud Native Transformation book. And then when you go to deliver, you then move very quickly. So you think you're doing lots of quick thinking to figure out exactly where the problems are going to be, and then you go and deliver at pace. And today I'm just really going to talk about how, if you've worked in a small enterprise or a small group or a small team, the way you kind of approach these kind of problems is completely different to the way you do in a much larger organization. And as technologists, I was an engineer, I was fiddling with Linux kernels, I was very familiar with the Linux API. I did a lot of performance management on high-performance systems. You tend to view everything as a technical problem, and you want to go as fast as possible. You want to introduce a new technology, show everyone how awesome it is, and then everyone will love it. And yeah, I'll talk a bit more about that in war stories later. But yeah, the idea is, the key thing I'm saying is don't be a purist and focus not only on the technology. Of course, you have to deliver, you have to actually make something happen, but you have to focus very much on bringing the organization with you, which is requires a completely different set of skills and, critically, a different set of metrics. And you're not going to make the change, you're going to make them make the change. So you've got to build up to a critical mass point where they're going to actually make the change for you. And based on our experiences at several clients and in our past careers, we've sort of identified 3 phases that I'm going to talk about as the sort of strategies. So very briefly, just to avoid any religious arguments, I'm defining DevSecOps loosely as similar principles as DevOps, just with sec thrown in. So you've got your automation, you try and do everything as code where possible, and shift left is a key aspect of it. My original conception of DevOps was similar to many people's, which was you build it, you run it, i.e. one team is responsible for the whole end-to-end pipeline for their system. But that doesn't really work in an enterprise, because you can't really fit dev, test, sec, fin, or data, SRE, AI, infra, ops. All those interests can't really sit in one room and be productive very easily. There are patterns that work in this. There's a concept I saw at a previous company called lean teams, and that was quite effective. But the fact is that many organizations are not going to find it easy, for various reasons, to switch to that sort of model of loose couplings of different groups of people into one team with a focus on delivery. So I'm talking here about companies where you might have a separate security team and a separate infra team and a separate dev team, which isn't really the pure conception of DevSecOps, but it's the one I'm sort of using today. So the perspective I bring to this is I worked for 14 years for a company that was a technical specialist in one thing. So they sold back-end systems for a particular vertical, and they dominated that space. And everything was about taking transactions as fast as possible. So it was sports betting, so it's sort of gambling system. One of my former colleagues is here who lived with me to tell the tale. And that produced a very different environment. Following that, I then got into Docker, and then through writing a book on Docker, got a job at Barclays, where I worked for 4 years in cloud infrastructure and a cloud transformation team, which was an utterly different environment. Then I worked for another bank, American bank called State Street, and then I moved into consulting. So the thing I really, looking back, the thing I really noticed that was different was when you're in a specialist company, you're operating in a very narrow domain, and the idea of a common goal was very easy. I mean, our job was to securely take bets as fast as possible without having downtime. That was it. That was the goal, and everything we did every week, every day, was subordinated to that goal. We would plan from the day after Grand National. We had a spreadsheet of 1,000 things to check for each customer, ready for the next year's Grand National. Because if you went down on Grand National, you'd failed. That was your end of us as a supplier, or at least it was going to be a very difficult time with the client. So what was left to fight about? Well, it was tooling. So we'd have enormous arguments about whether to use this tool or that tool. We were very technology focused, and so there were differences of opinion. I tried to introduce Erlang to that company because I thought it was a great fit. And I learned the hard way that not everyone likes writing functional code, or is interested in writing functional code. So actually that lesson was very useful going forward, because I realized that not everyone is actually interested in technology. And if you want to make change in an organization, you can't just show them, say, hey, there's this great new technology that solves the problem. You've got to actually teach them it and bring them with you. And that was a very painful lesson, because I spent a lot of time writing Erlang, and I never actually used it commercially. In large organizations, you've got sprawling domains. You know, unlike the specialist company where everyone was an expert in both the domain and the technology we were using, and there was a lot of sort of competition about who knew the technologies best. You've got, you might have Barclays, for example, had 6,000 development teams. So everything from high-frequency trading with severe demands on uptime to the address lookup for branches. That's at the other end of the scale. All these different groups have many different goals, many different interests, many different motivations. And so you get a lot of silos, and that goes even within, say, infra. You're going to have many competing groups who will have different interests and motivations. Actually, a little anecdote about Barclays. The reason I wrote a book called Learn Git the Hard Way was because when I was working in Barclays Infra, someone in the team came over to me and said, "Can you tell me who made a change and when?" From a particular line in a repo in Git. I was like, sure, just send me the Git repo and I'll tell you. So I got the Git repo and I did git log -- graph, and the whole page was pipes. And I said, do you guys rebase your changes? I said, no, we got 14 teams and everyone just merges into each other's branches. And it's it was so dense and so thick, I couldn't actually see the thing. So I ended up writing that course with the aim of teaching an infrastructure engineer what a rebase was and why it was important. So yeah, you get people, and in my other company, in that specialist company, the idea of not understanding that was, unacceptable. It was just, you had to know how Git works and use it properly. So what I learned in big organizations was that tooling matters less than alignment, because if you don't, you can have the right tooling, you can have the right product, but if the alignment is wrong, you can forget about making any sort of change. Even if your tooling is wrong, if you're well aligned and you have the right motivations and the right kind of culture, then you can actually make it work. The diversity in approach, the diversity in culture, the diversity in attitudes makes empathy absolutely key and critical to make change. You have to be able to understand where other teams are coming from, what the gaps are, whether they want to breach them, how you can help them, how you can build alliances with different groups, find people who are interested in what you're doing. These are all sort of the soft skills of this sort of thing. So let's look at the 3 phases. So phase 1 is identify. So what we found is that if you have this sort of setup where you have infra team, sec team, dev team, and they can't be brought together to work together in real time because of the scale, then the best way to introduce DevSecOps is to start by taking the manual steps that a security team might do. So, for example, a classic example of this is the Excel spreadsheet with the list of ports that are open with one data center or a machine per tab. That's the sort of classic one. The idea is to start slowly and start small. So, and go with the grain of those people. Those people have a job to do, and they're probably doing it fairly successfully. And if you go in and say, hey, you need to learn Git, you need to learn inspec, you need to learn all these cloud technologies, then you're it's gonna be tough for you to actually make those changes. So as a technologist, you're always ambitious. You always want to introduce Erlang or get the latest technology out. But the urge is to the thing I'm urging is to slow down and take your time. You've got to introduce the simplest tooling that will improve the situation for them with the highest impact. So, for example, turning that Excel spreadsheet into inspec files or something like that. And as a dev who's worked at a company with 700 engineers who are all geeks, I was really surprised when I went into other companies and found that there were lots of people who just weren't that interested in tech. They'd never programmed. They were very bright people, but they weren't from a development background. And so they had a completely different perspective on things, and they were willing to learn and interested in learning. But if you just told them, hey, go and learn this, they're like, well, I've got a job to do, so, and I've got a mortgage to pay and so on. So, I'm not going to, and I don't care that much about this stuff that I'm going to do at the weekend. And you have to work with the grain of that. So you've got to identify which processes are amenable to automation, improvement, and turning it into code. Then you've got to identify the training required. So you might show them how to write a simple pipeline or inspec or Terraform. And I talked about the Git anecdote there. There is a fantastic talk by Nikki Watt on Terraform adoption, where she talks about very similar themes very eloquently. She describes how you can't just go in and show someone mature Terraform and then expect them to just understand what's going on and learn it. Everyone has to go through the different stages. You start with a simple bit of Terraform. It's like, oh, that's great. That automates that thing. And then you go, hey, modules. And then you sort of go, oh God, do I have to learn this other thing? It's so complicated. The thing I have works. Why can't we just use modules? Why can't we just stick to what we have? And you kind of gently push those people into modules, and then you get more and more sophisticated concepts coming in. And you can't just go in and say, here's the way you need to do it, and off you go and do it, because it's very hard to learn that way. So she talks in some detail about that, and that's a really recommended talk. And Terraform, I mean, I've noticed a pattern with Terraform, which is that the people who are really into this stuff start adopting Terraform within a business, and they go crazy with the abstractions. So I think one customer had 3 or 4 levels of depth of modules, and it was correct. It's a bit like, you remember the Java days when someone would just abstract everything to the nth degree. It's a bit like that. And then when we found that when the typical engineer in that company started looking at those Terraform scripts, they just had no idea what was going on. It was just too abstract for them. So there is a sort of, I guess what I'm saying is there is a kind of happy medium between purity and practical learning approach. And the other key thing to do is to measure the baseline state. So as you're going through, you're going to have to show progress. And if you don't know where you came from, then you don't know how you're improving. So that's an absolutely critical step. Phase 2 is getting to that baseline adoption. So doing the early work of automation with the sec team. At the start, you're going to be probably writing stuff for them. And then gradually, as they show more and more interest, they're going to want to get their hands dirty with it. There'll be champions within those teams. There'll be people who are particularly interested in learning it. And the pair programming we do and the sort of the work with those teams is absolutely critical. And you've got to measure both the engineering progress and the knowledge transfer, because if you just do the engineering, as I say, you can build something for them, go away, and then they don't know what they built. I spoke to a company recently who'd spent an enormous sum on a machine learning project, and the consultant went in, built the thing, went away. And they just we don't know how this works at all. We have no idea what's going on. So knowledge transfer needs to be measured and tracked. And the goal is to get that other group of people to the point where they're sort of self-sustaining. So just like as a manager, you want to get to the point where you're redundant and you can move on up the organization. As an engineer, you want to get to the point where they're teaching each other and learning from each other and actually going beyond what you know. At that point, you can say that's successful. We've done it. And then finally, you go through you evolve towards the pure DevSecOps, where you've got separation of duties, either done right or done at all. Compliance testing, SDLC. You might introduce GitOps to help with auditing. Approval automation may require a ServiceNow lawyer in your business. That's always fun. And it's an example of what the diversity you need in your team. I've worked in teams where there's been someone whose job it is simply to face off to the PMO as an agile team and explain to them that, repeatedly trying to convert the agile way we were working into their reports that they had to write. So very much not just technology. There's this site, cnpatterns.org, which Container Solutions produced. It's based on the book, but all the patterns in the book are available there for download to look at. There's the book download link again. Some of the relevant ones here. So there's lots I could have included, but I just picked 5. You've got delayed automation is one. So you don't automate early. Make sure you've got a written process. Well, not necessarily written, but you've done an automatic process a few times. Ironed out all the manual steps and then automate. So don't do it too early. That's a useful pattern when you're automating a sec team's work. Create learning organizations. So speaking to the learning I was talking about, the goal of doing that. gradually raising the stakes, so you don't go all in with your huge DevSecOps vision all at once. You make a small experiment, you see how the system responded to, or the business responded to that, and then you get more and more ambitious as you go on. And this feels very slow, this part. This can feel really slow, and then at the end it goes really fast. And that's something the big projects book talked about a lot. And then we've got gradual onboarding and internal evangelism. So these are more patterns we found from doing cloud native kind of work. So, in summary, when you're working in a small business, small tech-focused business, you can afford not to compromise more easily. You can just build something in a weekend that proves your point. Other people will see the point, and you can push through with that. In a much larger organization, you have to be a lot more, like I say, empathetic and political about how you do it. And only by going with people as fast as they can go, you can actually make it work. Just because you can see the ideal state, that's the same sort of thing. Don't boil the ocean. Don't do too much at once. Focus on identifying quick wins when you start. So yeah, you need to actually demonstrate progress to management. So you've got to find that balance between building capability in the organization and also actually delivering for the people with the money. And then another absolutely critical thing is it's very easy to lose sight of the overall vision of what you're doing when you're in the day-to-day in the trenches fixing whatever. So it's really important to take a step back every now and again, remind everyone how far you've come and where you're going next. So thank you very much.